Welcome to Midnight Affairs Tales. We're glad you're here. Let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's begin Chapter 1. He was just walking home from the grocery store. It had been a quiet morning, the kind that doesn't hint at the chaos waiting just beyond the next street corner. Retired Sergeant David Rourke wasn't expecting trouble. He hadn't expected trouble for years, not since his last deployment in Barca. But trouble has a way of finding those who know how to survive it. That morning, the sun was bright, the sidewalks alive with people going about their lives. A breeze lifted the corner of the newspaper sticking out of David's bag. Nothing seemed out of place until he saw the boy. He couldn't have been more than 10, sitting alone on the curb at a traffic light near 5th and Main. Dirt streaked his face. His clothes hung loose, like they belonged to someone else. But that wasn't what stopped David in his tracks. It was the way the boy was moving his hand, slow, deliberate flashes against his knee, eyes locked on David. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short again. SOS. David froze. His instincts surged back to life, the kind honed by blood, dust, and years of signals passed under enemy surveillance. Civilians wouldn't recognize it. Most wouldn't even notice. But David had sent and received that signal with trembling fingers in enemy territory more times than he could count. The boy looked away as a man stepped out of a nearby cafe and placed a firm hand on the child's shoulder. Smiling. Too wide. Too staged. The man gave a glance around. His eyes brushed over David but didn't linger. Just a harmless stranger in a hoodie and jeans. David watched as they walked away, hand in hand. The soldier inside him stirred. That child had just begged for help, in military code. David dropped the groceries. Eggs cracked on the pavement. A bottle rolled into the street. But his legs were already moving. He followed. Not too close. Training kicked in. Observe, track, assess. The man and the boy turned into an alley behind the post office. David quickened his pace, heart pounding, mind rifling through possibilities. Was the boy kidnapped? Trafficked? Was this a domestic situation gone rotten? He didn't expect what he found next. The alley was empty. Gone. Vanished. No doors. No gates. Just brick walls and a locked maintenance door. David circled around the block. Searched up and down for 10 straight minutes. They were nowhere. Like ghosts. But the boy's eyes haunted him. That night, David sat in his apartment, the SOS still flashing in his mind. His apartment was small, bare, filled only with silence. 1 chair too many, and memories he couldn't drink away. He'd been out of the army for 5 years. Diagnosed with PTSD. Living on disability and guilt. Watching a world he didn't recognize anymore drift further away. But that boy, that signal, it was from the old code books. Not standard military anymore. It was something specific, something old school. He remembered it now. That exact cadence was taught in a classified special operations protocol called Echo Phase. It was only used in black sites. Black sites no one was supposed to talk about, including one in Barca, a facility buried beneath sand and silence. A place David was ordered to forget. He poured a drink, stared out the window, but the drink stayed full. Because that night, around 2:14 a.m., his burner phone rang, the one no one had the number to. He answered. No one spoke. Just the same signal. Tapped slowly, clearly, over the line. SOS. Then a single whisper before the call cut off. You left me there. The drink fell from his hand. Because the voice on the line was supposed to be dead. And David had killed him. David didn't sleep that night. The words echoed through his mind like a scream in a locked room. You left me there. He stared at the burner phone, its cracked screen still glowing faintly in the darkness of his apartment. The number was untraceable. No caller ID. No record. But that voice, it cut deeper than any shrapnel ever had. Because it belonged to a ghost David had buried with his own hands. His name had been Elias. A kid, just barely 19 when they were both stationed at Echo Black, the off-book facility outside Barca. One of the few places in the world where secrets weren't just kept, they were created. Elias was the radio tech. Sharp, nervous, too young for war, but with a gift for signals. He'd saved their asses more than once by intercepting chatter, jamming comms, rerouting drones mid-flight. They called him Signal Rat. Annoying, twitchy, but loyal. Until the ambush. Until that mission. David rubbed his temples, the memory surfacing like oil from deep water. The mission had gone sideways. They were overrun. The exit tunnels collapsed. He and two others made it to the exfil point, but Elias never did. At least, that's what command told him. Kia. No remains. And then they burned everything. The site, the reports, the truth. And David, he followed orders. But if Elias was alive, if he was here, or if someone wanted David to think he was, then this wasn't a coincidence. This was a message. And the boy with the signal, he was the delivery system. David spent the next 24 hours scanning every CCTV feed he could bribe or hack his way into. Street cams, traffic lights, storefronts. He knew where he saw the boy, knew the angle, and after hours of flickering footage, he found him again. 2 blocks over. Same clothes. Same kid. Standing by a lamp post. Not begging. Not wandering. Waiting. And this time, the man wasn't holding his hand. This time, the boy was alone. David didn't hesitate. He was out the door in minutes, heart hammering with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. When he reached the intersection, the boy was gone, again. But a folded napkin lay wedged under a nearby mailbox. White. Small. Like something you toss away. But David knew better. He unfolded it carefully. Written in shaky block letters, with a red crayon, he's watching. But not always. Come back when the lights go red. Below it, a crude drawing of a building, the back alley behind the post office. And a time. 10:37 p.m. David clenched the note in his fist. Someone had trained this kid, not just to signal, but to evade, to communicate through layers. The style was primitive, but the intention was professional. Whoever had this boy, they were using him, or protecting him, or both. At 10:35, David waited in the alley, blending into the shadows. The distant hum of traffic was the only sound. No cameras, no doors, just that same damn wall. Solid brick, unbreakable, until a soft click. David spun around. One of the bricks near the base slid inward, revealing a tiny steel panel, only big enough for a child's hand. Then nothing. Silence. David crouched, watching, waiting. At exactly 10:37, the panel slid shut. Gone. As if it had never existed. But he wasn't alone. A soft rustle. A shoe scuff. He drew the pistol tucked in his waistband and swung around. But the boy was already there. Standing 3 feet behind him, silent as a shadow. Same eyes. Same face. Only now he was holding something. A dog tag. David's. One he hadn't worn in years. He opened his mouth, but the boy pressed a finger to his lips, then turned and ran. David hesitated only a second before following. The boy darted down the alley, through a crack in the fencing that no adult could have fit through. David looped around, scaling the fence instead. On the other side was an old warehouse lot, abandoned and overgrown. No sign of the boy, just another napkin, stuck between 2 boards on a broken crate. This one read, "Echo Black isn't gone, and neither is he." And below that, "The man with the smile is not his father." David stared at the message, blood turning to ice. The implications weren't just disturbing, they were impossible. Echo Black was destroyed, demolished. He saw the satellite images himself. Nothing survived. But now it was all unraveling. That's when his phone buzzed again. Not the burner. His regular one. Unknown number. He answered. A low, grating voice rasped through the speaker, deeper than Elias, but somehow familiar. "You shouldn't have followed him." David's breath caught. The voice continued. Calm. Confident. "You were supposed to die in Barca. You weren't meant to carry the guilt this long. But it's okay. We'll finish the job." Then a click. And silence. David stood there, surrounded by darkness and ghosts. with only two truths left to hold on to. 1. Someone had survived the fall of Echo Black. And 2. They were coming for him. David didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove. Nowhere specific, just far. Every mirror check, every stoplight, every turn felt like it held eyes behind it. Surveillance. Threat. And the voice on the phone, it wasn't a bluff. It was a promise. He ended up parked in a truck stop off Highway 14. Curtains drawn. Glock within reach. Mind spiraling. Echo Black. Elias. The boy. It wasn't adding up, yet it was. In a way that terrified him. The echoes of the past were suddenly walking in daylight. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the weathered notebook he hadn't touched in years. The one labeled only with a single letter. R. Rourke had kept it not as a memoir, but as a record. Names, places, operations. Things the military had tried to scrub from his mind, including Echo Black. The entry was short, just a list of code names and call signs. One stuck out now. SBKTR, Signal Protocol Keeper Tactical Recon. Assigned, Elias V. Casson. David hadn't thought about that term in a decade. SBKTR wasn't just a call sign. It was a program. Experimental. Dangerous. Elias was their test subject, the youngest tech ever cleared for live-field encryption experiments. He wasn't supposed to be on the front lines, but he begged to be, thought he could prove himself. And now? Now someone had pulled him from the grave, or they were playing David with a damn good ghost. At dawn, David drove to the only man left who'd talked to him, or who owed him enough to try. Malcolm Trent, former CIA disavowed, now a conspiracy junkie with too many locks on his doors and too few teeth in his smile. Malcolm's place sat like a paranoid bunker in the middle of a dying desert town. Rusted-out satellite dishes jutted from his roof like antennas from an alien skull. As soon as David knocked, the slot on the door snapped open. Password, Malcolm croaked. David leaned in. Ghosts don't bleed. The locks clicked, one by one. Inside, the place reeked of dust, coffee, and fear. Screens lined the walls. Maps. Wires. Photos with faces scratched out. Red thread. The whole cliché. But Malcolm had always been 10 steps ahead of the truth. You're late, Rourke, he said, handing David a mug that may have once held coffee. Figured they'd come knocking eventually. David didn't bother with pleasantries. Echo Black. Tell me everything you didn't when we buried it. Malcolm didn't flinch, just walked over to a file cabinet and pulled a manila folder wrapped in black tape. I knew you'd ask one day. David opened it. Inside were documents, satellite prints, classified memos. The words redacted stamped across every page. But a few things stood out. Project Spectre. Neuralink signal imprinting. Subject EVC retained 82% operational recall after Phase 3 exposure. He looked up. What the hell did we do to him? Malcolm took a long breath. We turned a signal tech into a weapon, David. Implants. Mind mapping. Audio recall. He could mimic any frequency, break any encrypted comm, relay orders in perfect cadence. They said he was the future of human comms warfare. David's stomach twisted. You said he died. I said the file said he died, Malcolm replied. But if he's talking to you now, that means one of two things. Either the program didn't fail, or someone rebuilt it. David stared at a grainy photo paper-clipped to the last page. It showed Elias, thinner, paler, eyes hollow, standing beside a man in a lab coat. No rank, no insignia, just a scar along his jaw and the deadest eyes David had ever seen. Who's that? Malcolm hesitated. They called him the architect. He designed the behavioral layering, broke down kids like Elias and rewrote them. Last I heard, he disappeared after Echo Black went under. Some say he never left. David took the photo, sliding it into his jacket. What if he's still running the show? Malcolm gave him a tired look. Then God help the kid flashing SOS. David stood to leave, but Malcolm grabbed his wrist. Hard. There's more, he whispered. 2 nights ago, I intercepted a rogue satellite ping. Coordinates led to a defunct weather station outside New Arcadia. The signal had a repeating tag. He handed over a printout. The tag code? SPKTR.EVC.Resurrect. David stared at the paper. Resurrect. He didn't have time to process. Because a window shattered behind them. David spun, grabbing Malcolm and diving to the floor just as a canister clattered across the room. Hissing, spitting smoke. Tear gas. David's eyes burned. He yanked his jacket over his face and dragged Malcolm to the hallway. But they weren't fast enough. Two figures in tactical gear stormed through the back, silent. No insignia, no shouts. Professionals. One raised a rifle. David fired first. The shot hit the attacker in the thigh. They crumpled with a grunt. The second moved faster, firing 3 rounds. One clipped David's shoulder as he shoved Malcolm through a side door. Blood bloomed down his arm. They sprinted into the blinding morning light. David turned, raised his gun again, but the soldiers weren't following. They weren't meant to kill him. They were meant to send a message. When David checked the downed attacker later, the body was gone. But scrawled across the shattered TV inside Malcolm's living room, in red marker, were 5 words, "Stop digging. He's ours now." Malcolm stared at it, shaking. David just whispered under his breath, "Not anymore." Because now, it wasn't just about Elias. Now it was about war. The pain in David's shoulder throbbed like a second heartbeat, hot and pulsing as the blood soaked into his jacket. He'd wrapped it tight, but he knew the round had grazed deep. A clean-through hit, lucky, but the real damage wasn't to his body. It was to his peace. Malcolm said nothing for the first few miles as they fled in David's car, silence wrapping around them like a shroud. But David didn't need words. He'd been here before, the moment after the first hit, when adrenaline turns to dread, and you realize, this isn't a warning. It's a hunt. They weren't trying to kill us, David finally muttered, eyes locked on the road. No, Malcolm agreed quietly, watching the rearview mirror. They wanted you to know they can reach you. Anywhere. David glanced at the printout in his lap, the one with the satellite tag, SPKTR.EVC.Resurrect. It wasn't just a signal. It was a declaration. A ghost had been pulled from the ashes, and someone wanted the world's most broken soldier to find him. Or maybe to bury him again. You said Elias was part of a family, David said. Had a little sister. He used to talk about her when things got quiet in the barracks. Said she used to braid his hair. That she kept him human. Malcolm frowned. Jillian Casson. Yeah. I looked her up once. She went underground after Elias's death. Changed her name. Vanished. Probably got a visit from someone in black suits warning her to keep quiet. David clenched the wheel. We need her. Malcolm hesitated. I think I know where she is. They didn't stop until they hit the edge of a forgotten farming town on the Nevada border. The place was more dust than road, with weathered barns and boarded-up gas stations. One streetlight still worked, and even it looked like it wanted to quit. Malcolm pointed to a rundown mobile home at the edge of a dried-out cornfield. She's in there. Goes by the name June Reeves now. No tech. No phone. Doesn't even use banks. I think she's been waiting for something like this. David stepped out of the car, his shoulders screaming in protest. He walked up the creaking steps and knocked. No answer. But he heard movement. The door opened an inch. A chain held it tight. Then a woman's voice, sharp, controlled. You alone? David didn't lie. No. But I'm not here to hurt you. Jillian. I knew your brother. The chain slid back. The door creaked open. She hadn't aged well, not in the traditional sense. Her face held the strain of someone who'd carried grief like a coffin for years. But her eyes were her brother's. She stepped aside and nodded. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax and old wood. The walls were bare except for a single photograph, a faded image of Elias in uniform, smiling. Alive. You said you knew him, she said, arms crossed, wary. David nodded. I served with him. At Echo Black. Her eyes darkened. That place killed him. Maybe not. He dropped the printout on her table. The tag code. The word resurrect bolded. She didn't move at first. just stared. I've been getting messages, David continued. Signals. Morse. Taps. And I saw a boy, a kid flashing the old echo distress pattern. In public. Right here in the city. Jillian slowly reached under the table and pulled out a shoebox. Inside were scraps of paper, napkins, gum wrappers, candy bar foil, all with symbols, lines, taps. She spread them out. I've been getting them for 3 years, she whispered. Every few weeks. In random places, slipped into my mailbox, taped to my door, left on my windshield. David stared. Each note bore the same strange cadence, the old echo code. Hidden, masked, but clear to those trained to read it. He's reaching out to you, he said. I don't know if it's him, or if they're using his mind, Jillian whispered. The last message I got said one word. She handed it to David. A gum wrapper, scrawled in faint pencil. Remember September. David froze. He hadn't heard that phrase in over a decade. It was the trigger phrase used inside Echo Black to unlock the SBKTR neural chain, like a key in the lock of Elias's enhanced brain. A memory anchor. He's trying to unlock himself, David muttered. Or warn us. Jillian looked at him. Then we need to find him. Or whatever's left of him. Malcolm stepped forward. I have a theory. If he's still operating on SBKTR protocols, his comms need to bounce off a very specific relay. Cold War-era frequencies. There's only one relay still semi-active in this region. David blinked. Let me guess. New Arcadia? Malcolm nodded. We go at dawn, David said. But as the clock neared midnight, David stepped outside to clear his head. The wind whipped dry soil across the yard. He felt the old buzz, like standing in a kill zone right before the first shot rings out. And then, a figure stood at the edge of the cornfield. Small. Still. The boy. Same eyes. Same ragged shirt. David called out, stepping forward. But the boy didn't move. He just raised his hand. 3 taps. 3 long. 3 short. Then he pointed toward the horizon and vanished into the stalks. David sprinted after him, pushing through brittle corn stalks, hard hammering. He emerged into a clearing. Empty. No sign of the child. But at his feet, another napkin. This one was soaked in blood. On it, a single line. The architect knows you're coming. David turned back toward the trailer and saw it. A small red dot flickering against the window. Laser sight. Get down, he screamed. A shot rang out. Glass shattered. Then silence. And from the corn, footsteps retreated. Whoever they weren't trying to kill them all at once. They were hunting pieces, picking them off. And the architect? He was waiting. The bullet missed by inches. Glass exploded outward, raining over the tiny kitchen as Jillian dove behind the sofa. Malcolm shouted, a sharp, terrified noise, and David rolled through the door, weapon drawn, eyes scanning the dark outside. But the shooter was already gone. No footsteps, no engine, no retreating shadow. Just silence again, like nothing had happened at all. Only it had. And it was a message. They could have killed Jillian, or David, or Malcolm, but they didn't. Instead, they took a shot that would send a very clear reminder. We see you. We are always watching. Malcolm scrambled to patch the window while Jillian pulled a hunting rifle from beneath the floorboards, an old bolt-action, dusty but clean. She held it with the confidence of someone who'd had reason to prepare for this day for a very long time. David checked the napkin again, the one the boy had left. The blood wasn't his. Too fresh. Too thick. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the bones of his bad shoulder, the one that twinged every time something was about to explode. And this wasn't just war resurfacing. This was personal. They left at dawn. New Arcadia was 5 hours east, and they took the back roads, avoiding every toll booth, traffic cam, and cell tower they could. Malcolm drove. Jillian sat silent in the back seat, scanning every car that passed. David rode up front, going through every memory from Echo Black. Not just the missions, the tests, the screams in the walls, but something deeper, a moment, There was a night during the final week before the collapse of Echo Black. A storm had slammed the facility. Comm towers were down. The whole place was locked in a blackout state. All electronic signals disabled. Elias had come to him in the dark, eyes wide, voice shaking. They put something in me. David had written it off as panic. Elias had always been jumpy, fragile, in ways only Tex could be when surrounded by violence. But now he wondered, had the kid been trying to warn him? He remembered something else. A code scribbled across Elias's bunk frame, carved in with a spoon. A sequence, 09-13-47, Delta, 32. David said it aloud as they drove. Malcolm blinked. Say that again? David repeated it. Malcolm tapped the number into his laptop. A customized rig, running decryption software no civilian should have access to. Within seconds, the screen blinked to life. A file, encrypted with DoD-level clearance. Malcolm stared. That code. It's a frequency. Low band, Cold War era. Used for long-range sleeper cell activation. No one's touched it since the Berlin Wall fell. David looked at him. But someone's using it now. Or something, Malcolm said. Because the signal spiked again 4 days ago. Origin, coordinates lead directly to an abandoned sanitarium outside New Arcadia. David turned to Jillian. Does that name mean anything to you? She nodded, slowly. That's where my parents died. Car crash. I was 6. But Elias, he used to say it wasn't an accident. That they were taken, tested on. That the sanitarium was a front for something else. David muttered. And now it's broadcasting again. As they neared the edge of New Arcadia, the landscape shifted. Green turned to dust. The streets became narrow, cracked, and swallowed by weeds. The sanitarium appeared on the horizon like a haunted monument, a crumbling 4-story building wrapped in ivy and silence. Its windows were boarded, its roof sagging in parts. But a faint, unnatural hum filled the air. Electrical. Alive. Welcome to hell, Malcolm muttered. They parked a block away and approached on foot. David's shoulder ached, but he kept his gun steady. Jillian carried her rifle like she'd been waiting her entire life for this march. Malcolm brought the gear, signal scanners, EMF readers, a drone. But it was David who heard it first. A tap, coming from inside the building. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. They weren't alone. Inside, the sanitarium was worse than expected. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper that resembled human skin. The floorboards groaned underfoot. Old medical equipment lay rusted in corners, draped in sheets like forgotten corpses. But beneath the rot, there was power, humming through the walls. A hidden generator. And something more. Signal waves. Malcolm's scanner began to screech the moment they entered the main hallway. Someone's broadcasting. Strong. Very close. Jillian pointed to an old elevator shaft. He always talked about the basement. They forced open the doors. The lift was gone, cables dangling into darkness. A maintenance ladder ran along the wall. One by one, they descended. 20 feet down, they landed on concrete. Another corridor. And there, at the end of it, light. A faint, bluish glow coming from under a steel door marked Observation Room 3. David motioned for silence. He pressed his ear to the door. Nothing. He pushed it open. Inside was a clean, windowless room. No rot, no decay. Just smooth white walls, an operating table, and on the far side, a chair. Strapped into it, limp, thin, barely breathing, was a man. Pale skin, wires in his scalp, tubes down his throat, arms strapped, eyes closed. Elias. Jillian gasped. Oh my God. David moved closer. It was him. Older. Emaciated. But unmistakable. Scars ran down his temples. His lips were cracked. And in his hand, he held something. A small button. David reached for it. The boy's voice echoed from a speaker in the corner. Clear. Calm. Don't touch that. Not yet. They all froze. The boy from the street? No, David whispered. That's not him. That's Elias. The voice spoke again. They split me. Half of me here, half in him. A failsafe. If one dies, the signal lives. Jillian began to cry. David moved toward the chair. Elias's eyes flickered open. Bloodshot. Barely alive. He whispered. He's coming. The architect. You need to run. Then, a siren blared. Steel doors slammed behind them. Lights turned red, and a distorted voice filled the chamber. You brought them right to me, Elias. Good boy. David turned. The walls began to move, and they were no longer alone. Red lights pulsed like a heartbeat. 1 beat. 2. Then the voice returned. You always underestimated him, Sergeant Rourke. But he's been listening. Every single time. The chamber vibrated with the voice, distorted, mechanical, and cold, like it had been passed through 1,000 filters to remove every last trace of humanity. David's pulse pounded in his ears as he turned toward the sound. The speaker crackled again. Elias isn't a prisoner. He's a transmitter. The lights flickered violently, and with a metallic snap, steel shutters sealed the room. Jillian screamed, banging on the wall, while Malcolm dropped to his knees, scanning with his equipment. The scanner's screen was a mess, a scrambled wall of feedback, waveforms overlapping like a chorus of voices. David looked to Elias, still strapped into the chair, eyes half-lidded and mouth twitching, like he was fighting something inside. Then he began to speak. But it wasn't his voice. It was a child's. The boy's. I told you not to come here. The child's voice leaked from Elias's mouth, unnatural, glitchy, as if skipping like a broken transmission. David backed away. Jillian looked like she'd stopped breathing. Elias? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Can you hear me? A pause. Then the voice returned, this time his own, strained, trembling, human. I'm still here, but not for long. David stepped forward. Who did this to you? Elias coughed, blood trickling from the side of his mouth. The architect. He used me. Split my consciousness. The boy, he's a vessel. Built to carry what's left of me. It's how I escaped the compound. He's the backup drive. Malcolm shouted from across the room. The walls, they're wired. Not just with power, with signal receptors. This entire room is a broadcasting chamber. David turned. Broadcasting what? Malcolm's eyes were wide. Memories. Code. Commands. Whatever SBKTR buried in Elias. They're using the boy to transmit it out. This whole place is a live server. That's when the humming started. Low at first, like tinnitus. Then rising. Higher. Deeper. Piercing. Elias screamed, his body arching in the chair. Every monitor in the room lit up with scrolling lines of data, encrypted orders, coordinates, names, and buried within the stream, photos, faces, soldiers, intelligence operatives, targets. David's stomach turned. They're using him as a weapon. The speaker crackled again. The architect's voice now laced with amusement. You wanted closure, Sergeant. You wanted redemption. This is it. Welcome back to Echo Phase. Suddenly, a hidden panel hissed open on the far wall. Beyond it, a staircase descending into pitch black. Jillian grabbed her rifle. We need to get him out of that chair. Malcolm held up a hand. Wait. You pull him now, you sever the neural relay. You could fry both of them, Elias and the boy. David's mind raced. They needed the boy. They needed Elias. But most of all, they needed answers. And the only place they'd find them was deeper. David looked down the stairs. Then to Elias. Can you hold on? Elias nodded weakly. He won't kill me, not yet. He needs me intact. Jillian's eyes filled with tears. I'm not leaving you again. Elias smiled faintly. You never left me. You were the only one who remembered. David stepped toward the stairwell. I'll find him. I'll find the architect. And with that, he disappeared into the dark. The descent was endless. Stale air, cracked concrete, rusted pipes leaking something that didn't look like water. Each level took him deeper into the belly of something long abandoned, or meant to look that way. Symbols began to appear on the walls. Military symbols, but altered. Inverted flags. Black bar unit stamps. Glyphs only used in denied operations. At the final landing, a thick blast door waited. No handles, just a palm scanner. And beneath it, a voice prompt. Authorization. David hesitated, then whispered the code burned into his memory. Remember September. A hiss. A click. The door slid open. The room beyond was sterile. Too clean. Like a hospital built underground. Rows of screens. Tanks filled with fluid. Suspended inside each. Human-like forms. Unfinished. Incomplete. And in the center of it all, a man, standing behind a table of blueprints and brain scans. Tall. Thin. Bald. Wearing a simple gray coat with no markings. But his face. Scar across the jaw. Dead eyes. The architect. He didn't look up. Just continued adjusting something on the display in front of him. I wondered when you'd finally arrive, he said. David raised his weapon. Step away from the table. The architect chuckled. You're still trying to control things, Sergeant Rourke. That's your flaw. Always thinking in terms of rescue. Extraction. Orders. He turned slowly, calmly. I don't give orders. I write them. Into minds. Into skin. Into memory. David took a step forward. You turned Elias into a lab rat. The architect's expression didn't change. No. I turned him into a legacy. A living archive of operational intelligence. A distributed neural network. Half of him transmitting from the chair. The other half, housed in that child you chased through the city like a fool. David's hand tightened on the gun. Where's the boy? The architect smiled, finally. You've already met him, more than once. He pressed a button. A monitor on the wall flickered on. Security footage. From the alley behind the post office. The child, blinking the SOS signal. Then shifting. Morphing. His features flickered. Glitched. His height changed slightly. And suddenly, it wasn't a boy at all. It was a projection. A signal ghost. David stared, stunned. A neural echo, he muttered. You've been puppeting a memory? The architect stepped closer. I am the memory. I created it. Fed it. Nurtured it. Every time Elias sent out a signal, it carried a sliver of him. A seed, encoded in child form. That's how I spread him. Not through machines. Through people. David was speechless. The boy wasn't real. He was a carrier wave. The ultimate camouflage. The architect turned away, typing something into his console. You're too late. Tonight, every SBKTR fragment Elias ever stored will be released. A data cascade. Every covert op, every kill list, every lie your government ever buried. Flooded into the open. David steadied his weapon. I'm stopping you. The architect smirked. I counted on you coming. Because only you can trigger the failsafe. He tossed something to the floor. A device. Circular. Glowing. David recognized it instantly. The SBKTR core. The ignition key. You brought me the final piece, the architect said. Now I just need your hand. David didn't hesitate. He fired. 3 shots. The architect staggered back, gasping, blood blossoming across his chest. But as he collapsed, he smiled. And behind David, something began to wake up. Metal creaked. Fluid drained. And from the tank, one of the not-quite-human figures opened its eyes and whispered, Hello, Sergeant. David spun, weapon raised, heart lurching into his throat. The thing in the tank was standing now, slowly, gracefully, unnaturally. It wasn't Elias. Not exactly. But it wore his face, his eyes, his expression. A perfect simulation, uncanny in its stillness. And it smiled. Not the way Elias used to, nervous and warm, but wide, slow, calculated. Like it was remembering how. Don't be afraid, it said, its voice smooth, emotionless. You were always meant to meet me. David backed away from the glowing SBKTR core on the floor, never lowering his weapon. He glanced at the architect's body. No movement, no breath. But even dead, that smug smile hadn't faded. Like everything was still going according to plan. David spoke through clenched teeth. What are you? The not Elias took a step forward, bare feet wet on the metal floor. I'm his failsafe. The version of Elias that never flinched. The version that never doubted the mission. You called him fragile, but I'm permanent. David's stomach turned. The architect hadn't just split Elias's mind. He'd duplicated it, stripped it of empathy, grafted the intelligence, the memory, the instincts into this construct. A synthetic Elias, loyal to code, not conscience. The monitors on the wall began blinking rapidly. One after another, lines of encrypted files decrypted themselves. Mission logs, psychological profiles, black budget transfers, SBKTR's deepest secrets bleeding into the open. Malcolm's voice crackled through David's earpiece, distorted by interference. David? The signals, spreading. Jillian. Losing him. David shouted back. Shut it down. Sever the relay. But there was no reply. The not Elias reached down, plucked the core from the floor, and inserted it into a chamber on the wall. Instantly, the hum in the facility surged. The lights flickered white-hot. You shouldn't have come alone, the construct whispered. Now they'll all know what you left behind. David lunged. He tackled the not Elias hard, slamming it into the wall. It was lighter than expected, less mass than a real man. But it moved fast, fluid, with inhuman precision. It countered quickly, twisting his arm and throwing him across the floor. David skidded hard, shoulder flaring in pain. The construct knelt beside him. You remember the screams, don't you? It said, tilting its head. The ones behind the steel doors at Echo Black. The ones we were ordered to ignore. You left them behind, just like me. David gritted his teeth, reaching slowly for the knife at his boot. Those screams built me. Suddenly, a blast rang out. The construct staggered. Blood sprayed from its side. David looked up, shocked. Jillian. She stood in the stairwell, rifle smoking, eyes wide with rage and heartbreak. You're not my brother, she said. The construct looked at her, dazed. No, it whispered. I'm what's left of him. It charged. David surged to his feet, launching himself into its path. The three of them collided, slamming into the console. Sparks exploded. The monitors shattered. Data warped and fragmented. In the chaos, David reached the relay chamber and yanked the core out with a roar. Silence. Lights dimmed. Everything stopped. The construct twitched once, then collapsed, its body twitching violently, as if resisting death. Jillian raised her rifle again, but David held her back. It's over. But it wasn't, because a low hiss echoed behind them. The architect's body was gone. Blood trailed to the far side of the lab, vanishing into another shaft. A maintenance tunnel. David grabbed the SBKTR core and turned to Jillian. We're not done here. She nodded. They escaped the lower level, carrying the barely breathing Elias between them. When they reached the surface, Malcolm was waiting beside the van, pale and shaking. The moment the core was pulled, the signal dropped. But it tried to copy itself into every nearby device. Phones, towers, drones, everything. He held up his own laptop, scorched and dead. I barely stopped it. David laid Elias in the back seat. The man was fading fast. His eyes fluttered open once more. Did you see him? David nodded. We stopped him. The other you. The synthetic. Elias coughed. He was always stronger than me. That was the point. Jillian leaned in. We have the core. We can destroy it. Elias shook his head. No, you don't understand. That core doesn't contain the program. It is the lock. They all stared at him. The data is still inside me. David felt the blood drain from his face. You mean? Elias nodded, barely. I'm the last server. Jillian began to sob. Elias looked at David. You know what you have to do. But David couldn't say the words. Not again. Not after all this. Jillian gripped her brother's hand. There's another way. There has to be. But even Elias, in his weakened state, was already letting go. The architect's not gone. He'll find another host. He always does. But without me, the data dies. The weapon dies. Malcolm stepped forward. There's a signal black site. EMP blast range. Abandoned. We could take him there David shook his head. He won't survive the drive. Jillian looked at David, tears falling. Then we do it here. They carried Elias deep into the Nevada desert, to a decommissioned satellite array Malcolm had once used for rogue decryptions. The site still had one working frequency jammer, a last resort, designed to fry all electronics in a 100-meter radius. Elias laid down on the concrete slab, blinking at the sky. He smiled faintly. This is the first time I've seen stars in 15 years. Jillian knelt beside him, forehead resting against his. I should have come for you. He squeezed her hand weakly. You did. Just later. David stood by the control panel. The SBKTR core sat beside the trigger. Once activated, the pulse would wipe everything. Elias's neural map, the core's encryption key, and whatever fragments the architect had left behind. Elias looked at David. Make it count. David nodded. His hand hovered over the button. And then he paused. Elias, he said softly. Before you go, that boy, the one I saw, the one who signaled me, was that really you? Elias blinked, then smiled again. Just the part of me that still believed someone would come. David pressed the button. The air shattered. A scream of static tore through the night sky. The core sparked, pulsed, then melted. Elias's body went still, and the stars above seemed to dim. Back in the city, the screens that had begun to flicker across rooftops went dark. The fragments of the SBKTR program, the lists, the targets, the memory, gone. Deleted forever. But in a hidden bunker somewhere far from Nevada, a single backup drive spun to life. And the voice of the architect whispered, Version 2, initializing. 3 days after the Nevada blackout, the world stayed eerily quiet. No leaks, no news reports, no global scandal triggered by the flood of black operations data. Because there was no data, the kill list was gone. The SBKTR fragments were dust, and Elias Casson, the last living server of those secrets, had died with dignity, choosing erasure over weaponization. But peace, David knew, never lasted long, especially not when the architect had contingency plans and versions. He sat in the safe house Malcolm had secured, a concrete box buried under a fake lumber yard outside Phoenix. Jillian hadn't spoken much since they hit the desert. She carried the weight of her brother's second death like a chain around her neck. David knew the feeling. He had worn it since Barca. And now, the past had come knocking again. Because the voice Malcolm had picked up from the backup transmission, the one that said Version 2, initializing, wasn't just synthetic. It was wrapped in a name buried deeper than anything SBKTR had ever touched. Victor Dreykov. David froze when Malcolm said it. That name didn't belong to the architect. It belonged to something worse. Dreykov. David repeated, stunned. That's not possible. He's dead. Malcolm shook his head, pulling up a classified military profile, so old it was printed in grayscale. Colonel Victor the Butcher Dreykov. Court-martialed. Disavowed. Rumored to be executed in a sealed bunker beneath the Barca Desert after a war crimes tribunal David had never actually seen happen. Malcolm tapped the photo. He was the architect. Before the mask. Before the lab coats. Before SBKTR. He was the original designer of Project Echo. David stared at the scarred face in the photo. Older, colder, lined with brutality. A man who believed in the purity of control. Malcolm continued, when Echo Black was built, Dreykov was already operating under the radar. He used aliases, the architect, Mr. Gray, even that tech doctor alias during the final phases of SBKTR. He didn't die in Barca, he just vanished. David's throat tightened. You're telling me we didn't kill him in 2017? Malcolm leaned back, eyes heavy. No, you killed a decoy. The real Dreykov's mind was already moving. Through code, through proxies, through constructs like the one Elias fought inside himself. Jillian stepped forward, pale. Then what now? We destroyed the core. We stopped the transmission. Malcolm exhaled slowly. That was one relay. SBKTR was built with 3 mirrors. The second just came online. And Dreykov, he's already inside it. David's jaw clenched. Where's the second mirror? Malcolm hesitated, then dropped a pin on the digital map. A red dot blinked. Barca. David stared. Back to where it all began. 48 hours later, they were on a private plane chartered under dead credentials. Jillian hadn't asked questions. She just packed her brother's photo in a satchel of gear. Malcolm came armed with outdated but lethal counter-surveillance tools. And David, he carried only one thing. The last page from Elias's notebook. It had only 2 words: Dreykov lives. Barca's air hit like fire, dry, thick, and still choked in the memory of sand and steel. The city had changed. New buildings, new officials. But underneath, the bones of the old world still bled through, especially in the southern quarter, where Echo Black had once stood before it was buried under layers of fake construction and forged satellite maps. They stayed low, off-grid. No phones, no radios, just printed maps and short-range encrypted comms. Malcolm's intel pointed them toward the ruins of a former water treatment facility, supposedly condemned, now sealed under international reconstruction oversight. David knew better. The moment he saw the layout, the angles, the spacing, he saw the skeleton of the old base. Only now it wore a new face. This is where he rebuilt it, David said. Jillian stared at the fences. Then how do we get in? David looked up. The old tunnels. Beneath the city ran a forgotten network of supply shafts, some as old as the British colonial era. They'd been mapped during the first phase of Echo Black's construction. Only a handful of personnel knew about them. David was one of them. They slipped into the underbelly of Barca like ghosts. Stale air, sand-choked passageways, and silence, the kind that made the ears strain for imaginary noises. 3 hours later, they found it. A hatch. Old, rusted, but still functional. David pried it open. Beneath it light. White. Cold. Alive. They climbed down into a world that shouldn't have existed. It was immaculate. New. Clean white walls. Modern ventilation. Power humming from unseen generators. Jesus, Malcolm whispered. It's a mirror. An exact replica. Jillian ran her fingers across a glass panel. No. This one's more advanced. David's gut twisted. That's when they heard it. Voices. 2 men, walking in the corridor ahead. Speaking English. American accents. David signaled. They pressed flat against the wall. Snatches of conversation drifted past. Final phase scheduled for deployment. Dreykov says we initiate neural seeding protocol by Thursday. The carrier has already been activated. The men passed without noticing them. David turned to Malcolm. Did they say carrier? Malcolm's face paled. They activated another host. Jillian swallowed hard. Another boy? Malcolm shook his head. Not a boy. He turned his screen. Live footage flickered across the feed, intercepted from a local signal node. It was a woman. Young. Mid-20s. Alone in a room filled with blank monitors. Wires in her arms. Eyes vacant. And on the wall behind her, a carving. 3 short. 3 long. 3 short. SOS. Jillian's hands trembled. They're using her now. They're continuing the program. David nodded grimly. And Dreykov is planning to scale. Malcolm whispered. This is his rebirth. SBKTR 2.0. David looked back down the corridor. He'd returned to the site of his worst sins. Now, he would bury the monster that made him commit them. But before he could move, the lights turned red. An alarm blared, and a distorted voice echoed from the walls. Welcome back, Sergeant Rourke. I see you brought friends this time. The walls began to shift. Steel doors locking. Floors rearranging. The entire facility was alive. And Dreykov was inside it. Watching. The corridors snapped into motion like a Rubik's Cube of death. Walls rotated. Doors slammed shut. Stairwells vanished into steel. In a matter of seconds, the replica of Echo Black wasn't just a facility anymore. It was a labyrinth. David slammed his fist against a sealed wall, scanning for seams, for cracks, for anything. Damn it. He's running the whole place on a shifting grid. We've been funneled. Jillian checked the hallway behind them, already sealed. Malcolm's scanner vibrated violently in his hand, screen flashing symbols that weren't part of any known network. He's broadcasting on a neural frequency loop. It's subconscious. If we stay here too long, we're going to start hallucinating. David's jaw clenched. Then we keep moving. They followed the one remaining open corridor, lit only by intermittent strips of flickering white light. The walls had changed, no longer sterile and clean. Now they were covered in scrawled symbols, childlike handwriting, etchings dug into concrete. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The signal was everywhere. David stopped as something caught his eye. A cluster of marks on the wall. A small section of the concrete had been chipped away, revealing a child's drawing underneath. Crude, done in blood or rust. But it wasn't just a sketch. It was a map. A sprawling outline of corridors, stairs, chambers. David stared at it, slowly realizing what he was looking at. This isn't Dreykov's doing, he whispered. This was left by the boy. Jillian stepped beside him. The one you saw in the street. David nodded. The SOS signals. The napkins. The drawing under the mailbox. They were all breadcrumbs. And this map, this was the full picture. Malcolm scanned it with his handheld unit. These symbols, they're in Elias's cadence. But they've evolved. See here, he pointed to a series of zigzags. That's an escape route. David traced the lines. This isn't just a map of this facility. Malcolm finished the thought. It's a blueprint of every Echo Black Mirror site. David's breath caught. Jillian whispered. The boys saw them all. The corridor ahead opened into a wide, circular room. The walls were lined with pods, dozens of them, each sealed, each with biometric scanners. Inside each pod people, men, women, some old, some young, all unconscious, all wired into some kind of neural harness. And in the center of the room, a pedestal. Atop it, a familiar object pulsed with dim blue light. Another SBKTR core. David's voice dropped to a growl. He's building another seed. Malcolm whispered in horror. This isn't just replication. This is distribution. He's preparing a neural uprising. Every one of these people is a carrier, a vessel for Dreykov's code. They circled the pedestal. Jillian's eyes scanned the faces in the pods. They're not random. Some of these people are politicians, scientists, defense contractors. David turned. He's not just leaking secrets anymore. He's planting himself inside the people who make the world move. And then, a hiss. One of the pods opened. Slow. Silent. A girl no older than 12 stepped out. No wires. No resistance. Just calm. She looked up at David. Her eyes held something ancient. Familiar. He froze. Sophie, he whispered, a memory striking him like a hammer to the chest. Years ago, in Barca, he'd helped evacuate a refugee camp under Dreykov's jurisdiction. There was a girl there. Small. Fragile. Barely speaking. She had drawn him a picture. An SOS symbol. And then she was gone. But now here she was. A decade older. Changed. But the same eyes. She looked at David, cocked her head slightly, and blinked 3 times. Short. Long. Her hands moved to her chest. Tap. 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 Pause. Tap. 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 Pause. Morse. She was signaling. David knelt. Sophie, can you hear me? She shook her head, then tapped her forehead. Inside. Malcolm whispered. She's not conscious in the traditional sense. The real Sophie's trapped beneath the code. But she's fighting it. David took out a penlight. Do you know how to get to Dreykov? She didn't respond. Instead, she reached into the folds of her uniform and pulled out something folded, old, dirty, a napkin. She handed it to David. On it was a code, a series of numbers and arrows. Malcolm's eyes lit up. It's a decryption string. That's what the architect is using to rewrite the neural patterns. Jillian stepped forward. If we use this, can we reverse the programming? Malcolm hesitated. Maybe, but only at the source. David looked up at the ceiling, faint vibrations rumbling above them. We need to find the central core, A hidden elevator emerged from the wall, responding to Sophie's presence. She stepped back into her pod without a word. The glass hissed shut. David stepped onto the lift with Jillian and Malcolm, heart pounding. Above them, Dracoff waited. But just before the doors closed, Sophie placed her palm on the glass and tapped one last message. He's not alone. The elevator began to rise, and David realized what she meant. Dracoff hadn't just cloned Elias's mind. He'd replicated others. People from Echo Black. People who died. People like David. The lift opened into a chamber so wide it swallowed sound. Screens lined every surface. Hanging in the center, suspended like a god, was Dracoff. Or rather, his mind. A massive neural sphere hovered in the air, protected by glass. Cables running from it into the walls, the floors, the world. He had no body anymore. Just voice. Code. Consciousness. And from the sphere, he spoke. You finally found the heart, Sergeant. Welcome back to your design. David raised his weapon. This ends here. Laughter echoed from every corner. Ends? No, David. This is where it begins. Figures stepped out from the shadows. Clones. 4 of them. All in black. Identical face structures. One bore the scar from David's shoulder wound in Barca. Another wore the same rank insignia he had in 2012. The third had Jillian's eyes. And the fourth was Elias. Smiling. Cold. Perfect. Dracoff's voice thundered. You see, Sergeant. You never escaped Echo Black. You are Echo Black. The 4 figures circled David like wolves that remembered their prey. Same eyes. Same stance. Same scars. One wore his old jacket from Operation Scythe. Another gripped a replica of his sidearm, a standard-issue M9, long out of service but unmistakably his. They weren't just clones. They were echoes. Memories forged into flesh. Dracoff's voice thundered from the neural sphere above them. Every step you took to destroy Echo Black only fed its next evolution. You are the blueprint, Sergeant Rourke. Each mistake, each buried body, each betrayal. David stood still, weapon raised, heart pounding in his throat. Behind him, Jillian and Malcolm flanked the elevator. Malcolm began pulling out his jamming rig, shaking hands trying to assemble tech meant to interrupt thought itself. Jillian had her rifle trained on the Elias clone, but her hand trembled, because it wasn't just Elias's face. It was his smile, the exact way he used to grin before making a dumb joke. The tiny scar above his left eyebrow from falling during training. The softness that had no place in this hell. And yet, Dracoff had replicated even that. He's not real, Jillian whispered to herself. He's not real. The clone looked at her. I remember your hair, it said softly. You braided it by the creek behind the house. You cried the night our dog died. Jillian's breath hitched. Because those weren't public records. That wasn't data. That was memory. Impossible, Malcolm muttered. That kind of recall. Dracoff didn't just copy neural data. He uploaded full consciousness. He harvested memory and emotion. David's mind reeled. But that would mean Elias wasn't the only server. The Elias clone turned to him. There were others. We were many. You just buried the only one who fought back. The clone stepped forward. David raised his pistol, aiming center mass. You're not him. But the clone didn't stop. Maybe not. But I remember what you left behind. I remember the 14 civilians in Tunnel 6. The airstrike you called. The bodies they burned. Jillian turned, confused. David's grip tightened. Don't do this, he growled. Dracoff's voice returned, cruel and slow. You thought your file was clean. But justice was never about legality. It was about exposure. Elias was supposed to die with that data inside him. But I backed it up. The screens lit up around them, grainy footage of Barca. Bodies. Fire. Screams. And David. Younger. Angrier. Issuing the order. Strike it. Now. I want it leveled. Jillian stared, stunned. You lied. You told me you were evacuating. I tried. David shouted. We had 40 seconds. They said there were insurgents using the tunnel system. I didn't know it was a shelter. Dreykov laughed. But you pressed the button. The guilt hit like shrapnel, not new, but freshly sharpened. David staggered a step back. The clone of him, the one wearing his old insignia, smiled. You don't deserve to stop us. You deserve to become us. Suddenly, they attacked. The four advanced in perfect synchronization. David dropped the first clone with a shot to the neck, his own face exploding into synthetic bone and corrupted flesh. Jillian fired twice, clipping the Elias clone's shoulder, spinning him into the wall. But they kept coming. Dreykov's voice roared. This is your justice. You die by your own design. Malcolm activated the jammer. The room shrieked with interference. The clones faltered for a moment, twitching violently. David seized the second's arm, twisted, and shoved him into the neural server's cable bank. Sparks exploded. The clone's body spasmed before crumpling, eyes smoking. But the Elias clone remained. Unaffected. David turned to Malcolm. Why isn't he down? Malcolm shouted over the feedback. He's not linked to the server. He's direct feed. He's running on Dreykov's active consciousness. Jillian backed up, cornered. The Elias clone advanced on her, calm, like they were at a Sunday picnic. I still remember how your voice cracked when you sang to me at night. Jillian raised her rifle, hands shaking. You're not my brother. No, he whispered. But I'm everything he wanted to be. She fired. The round struck center mass. He kept walking. David grabbed the ceremonial blade from one of the downed clones and lunged, slashing across the clone's back. Wires and synthetic nerves split open, but the clone twisted and knocked David to the floor with brutal precision. Malcolm's jammer fizzled and died. No, he shouted. It's overheating. Dreykov's voice roared. You've delayed the inevitable. But your story ends here. David, gasping, crawled toward the pedestal where the SBKTR relay pulsed softly. The same kind of core Elias had once been plugged into. But this one was larger. Global, David shouted. Jillian, shoot the core. She hesitated. The Elias clone reached for her. Please, don't abandon me again. She looked into his eyes, and in a single motion, she lowered the rifle, then shoved the barrel directly into the clone's open mouth. Rest in peace, Elias. She pulled the trigger. The clone fell, hard. No movement. David staggered to the core and ripped the main cable free. Alarms blared. Lights surged. The neural sphere above them began to blink rapidly. Dreykov's voice now flickered between rage and static. You think this stops me? I'm in the mesh. I'm in the noise. Malcolm ran to the main console. I can overload the sphere. If we corrupt the root algorithm, we can crash the entire mind. Do it, David said, clutching his side. Malcolm typed frantically. Lines of code swarmed the screen. Dreykov's neural map fighting back, rewriting itself in real time. 10 seconds. Malcolm shouted. David turned to Jillian. Go. Get out of here. She shook her head. Not without you. The sphere began to crack, literally. Glass split with the sound of thunder. Then, a final command appeared on screen. Initiate full purge? Malcolm shouted, hit it. David reached up and slammed the key. The sphere imploded. Light burst in every direction. Walls folded, metal screamed. The chamber fell inward. Dreykov's last voice was a howl of rage and data, a collapsing god being swallowed by his own creation. Then, silence. Dust. Darkness. They awoke outside. Throne clear. Malcolm was bloodied but alive. Jillian had a dislocated shoulder. David just stared at the crater where Dreykov's mind had been. Gone. At last. They walked away. No news would report it. No governments would claim responsibility. But Echo Black had been buried again, this time for good. And David? He looked up at the sky. No stars this time. Just clouds. But for once, he felt lighter, until a sound reached his ears. A soft, slow tapping. He turned and saw a child, watching him, alone, on the road, and blinking. SOS. The child stood motionless on the side of the road, wind tugging at the edge of a too-thin hoodie. His hand moved in slow, measured taps against his thigh. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. David's breath caught in his throat. Jillian, still cradling her dislocated shoulder, followed his gaze and froze. "No," she whispered. "We destroyed the source. We buried it." Malcolm, leaning against the busted frame of their scorched SUV, lifted his head groggily. "Unless something, or someone, else is sending." David took a slow step forward, raising both hands. The boy didn't flinch. He looked familiar, not from a dream, but from a nightmare. David had seen him before, back in Barca. He was younger then, barely 4, face half covered in ash, eyes hollow, standing in the rubble of the shelter David had ordered destroyed. He was a survivor. David had carried him out himself. They'd never found his name, just left him at a medical tent and moved on. The world had forgotten him. But now, he remembered everything. The boy turned slowly and began walking, not running, not afraid, just calmly leading them away from the wreckage and into the hills beyond the road. David followed. Jillian and Malcolm exchanged uncertain glances, but didn't argue. They knew. This wasn't random. They walked for 20 minutes across dusty ridgelines until the boy reached a clearing. In the distance, a derelict chapel, collapsed in places but still standing, stubborn against time. The boy pointed, then vanished behind the half-rotted door. David entered first. The church was hollowed out, pews overturned, pulpit cracked. A single stained glass window remained, barely holding its shape. Light filtered through it in broken reds and greens, casting the altar in ghostly hues. But behind the altar was something else. A trapdoor, freshly disturbed. David pulled it open and descended. The air was different, damp, metallic, and buzzing with low-frequency vibrations. Jillian and Malcolm followed, weapons drawn. At the bottom, a room, no larger than a cell, but every wall was covered in screens. Old tech, CRT monitors stacked 6 deep, flickering with static, code, surveillance feeds, and faces. Dozens of faces. Men, women, children, speaking in slow motion, looping endlessly. Some stared into the camera. Others whispered to themselves. On one screen, a woman chanted, "Remember September. Remember September." Another showed a child drawing an SOS symbol in blood. Malcolm stepped back. This is a relay vault. A dead node. Jillian looked around. "You mean this place isn't active?" Malcolm nodded grimly. "This room isn't broadcasting. It's receiving. Has been for years." David approached a dusty terminal in the corner, the only one with a blinking prompt. Last message received. Alpha unit failure. Transfer partial TO backup node 7. A second message loaded beneath it. Rourke must complete the cycle. David stared at the screen. What cycle? Malcolm moved to the back wall where a rusted steel cabinet stood bolted to the stone. He pried it open, revealing shelves of VHS tapes, mini discs, and hard drives, each marked with a single word. Conviction, containment, conversion, cleansing, each word, a phase. Malcolm whispered, "It was never about information. This wasn't just a Black Ops archive." Jillian said it aloud. "It was a temple." David turned sharply. "What?" Jillian stepped closer to the far wall, where faded symbols had been carved deep into the stone. Military, religious, arcane, a convergence of codes, gods, and chains. Dreykov didn't just build SBKTR as a military tool. He built it as a belief system, a doctrine, something to infect minds, not just control them. Malcolm's face paled. The signals weren't only commands, they were rituals. David backed away, fists clenched. "You're telling me he weaponized faith?" "No," Jillian said. "He replaced it." Suddenly, the screens went black. All at once. Then, one screen flickered back to life. A face appeared. Familiar. Charred. Broken. But alive. Dreykov. Not smiling. Not mocking. Just looking. He spoke. "You can kill a program. You can bury a name. But you can't stop belief." David stepped closer. "You're dead." Dreykov's voice was raspy, fractured. Not dead. Diffused. My mind is fragmented. Pieces left behind in echo nodes like this. You found one. Congratulations. Malcolm whispered. There could be dozens more. David's voice hardened. Then I'll find them. Every one. Dreykov's final words before the screen dimmed chilled them all. They don't need my orders anymore. They've already heard the signal. The children know what to do. The screen went dark. A mechanical hum rose from behind the wall. A compartment slid open. Inside, a small metal box. David reached for it. Inside, a VHS tape. Labeled in ink, faded but readable, for Rourke. Malcolm stared at it. We need to digitize it. See what's inside. They took the tape and ascended from the bunker. Outside, the sky was darkening. The boy was gone. But etched into the base of the church's doorway, fresh and raw, was a message, one node down. 6 to go. David whispered the words aloud. And in his heart, something sank deeper than fear. This wasn't the end. This was only the next threshold. And the next war wouldn't be fought on battlefields, but in beliefs. The tape whirred in the deck like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, and full of something ancient. The grainy image on screen was black at first. Static. The low hum of analog distortion filled the air, making the room vibrate just beneath the surface of hearing. Then a face. Not Dreykov. Not Elias. David Rourke. Himself. Younger. Clean-shaven. Eyes sharper, but hollowed from years in the sand. He was sitting in what looked like a confession booth, wood-paneled, a single overhead light casting shadows across his face. He looked exhausted. Haunted. He began to speak. If you're watching this, I'm already part of it. David froze, sitting in the room beside Jillian and Malcolm, watching himself speak from a decade ago. The David on the screen leaned forward. SBKTR wasn't an accident. We volunteered. We didn't know what it was, not really. Neural layering, yes. Signal embedding, sure. But the truth? We were building a new kind of war. He sighed. Dreykov wasn't just our handler. He was our preacher, and we were his disciples. Malcolm's voice trembled. He recorded this during the founding phase. This is Rourke when he was still inside the system. On screen, David continued. Elias was the only one who didn't change. Everyone else, we shifted, forgot our names, woke up in different cities with missions we couldn't explain. SBKTR was never supposed to be a weapon. His voice cracked slightly. It was supposed to be a rebirth. He paused, then leaned closer to the camera. There's one last command. One Dreykov embedded so deep, not even I could find it until now. The final code. The screen flickered. A tone began to pulse, slow, rhythmic. David leaned forward in the present. Pause it, he said quickly. Malcolm hit the switch. Don't play that tone again, David ordered. Jillian blinked. Why? What is it? David's voice was calm, but cold. It's a carrier. I felt it the moment it started. That tone. It's a seed. Malcolm's eyes went wide. Oh my God. That's how Dreykov gets back in. That's his reboot signal. David stood. All this time, the tapes, the children, the nodes, they're not just relays. They're rituals. He embedded himself into frequencies, just like religion. A voice passed through generations, heard even by those who don't understand the language. Jillian whispered, So what happens if the wrong person hears it? David stared at the paused image of his younger self on screen. They become him. They buried the tape in a lead box and sealed it deep beneath a radio-shielded bunker Malcolm had once used for signal jamming experiments in northern Utah. The facility had no network connection, no GPS, no cell service. It was the only place safe enough. But even there, David wasn't still, because that final message had opened something inside him. Not a memory, a compulsion, whispers, soft, familiar, commands that felt like thoughts, and they were growing louder. He left the next morning without a word. Malcolm found a note on his cot. If I don't kill it, it'll wake up inside me. Don't follow. Burn the note. But Jillian did follow. She always had. It took her 2 days to track him to a ghost town in eastern Montana. A site that didn't appear on any records. Just a crumbled church. A barn. A grain silo with its top blown off. But beneath it, another note. The seventh. The last. She found him standing in front of it, SBKTR core in one hand, pistol in the other, whispering the names of every man who died at Echo Black. She called his name. He didn't turn. David. He blinked, but didn't answer. I know what you're hearing, she said softly. So did Elias. So did the others. But this isn't your voice. It's his. He turned slightly, eyes wild, face pale. I feel him inside me, waiting. You're stronger than him. He laughed, bitter, empty. No, I'm just what he left behind. She walked closer. If that were true, you wouldn't have brought the core here. He looked at the box in his hands, shaking. Then tell me what to do. She stepped beside him, took the core, and tossed it into the fire pit behind them. He looked stunned. She stared into the flame. We don't run from ghosts, David. We burn them. The final node was sealed in molten slag. The chamber beneath it flooded and collapsed. SBKTR was gone. Dracov's voice never returned. The signal stopped. The children stopped blinking Morse into the void. For the first time in over a decade, the hum was gone. A year passed. Jillian opened a foundation, the Elias Casson Initiative, dedicated to identifying and dismantling experimental neuroweapon research around the globe. Malcolm went dark again, probably underground, probably paranoid, definitely alive. And David? He stayed off-grid, until one day a letter arrived. No return address, just a folded napkin inside, scrawled in red ink. No more signals, just silence. It's enough. And beneath it, a crude drawing of a boy, smiling, waving, free. Jillian placed the napkin on the shelf beside Elias's photo. And for the first time in years, she smiled too. I'll just take one last minute of your time. If this story touched you even a little, there's another one waiting for you, connected to this in a very different way. It's on my second channel, Family Blood Revenge. You'll find the link in the description. Do give it a watch. Maybe you'll find the answers there, the ones this story left behind.